Welcome to the basics of foundation paper piecing with Everyday Stitches. All right, in this video, we are going to go over the basics of paper piecing and talk about everything you need to know to get started. All right, we're going to be working on this pattern. This is Rita the Ripper, our favorite sewing notion. Lover or hater, it's up to you. But anyhow, we are going to work on some of the simpler blocks on this. All right, so here's the stuff you need for paper piecing. You'll need, of course, your pattern, and all our Everyday Stitches paper piecing patterns come with the master blocks, and you will need to copy these onto your foundation paper of your choice. We prefer newsprint because it's readily available and it's inexpensive and it goes through your machine with no trouble. Okay, so you've got your pattern, you've got your foundations printed. Then you need just some basic sewing supplies: a rotary cutter and mat, fabric scissors, paper scissors, acrylic ruler for squaring up in the end, and of course your seam ripper, because you know you will need it at some point. We also, one specialty thing for paper piecing that we like that works so well is this add a quarter ruler. This is the 12-inch ruler, and it's got your beveled edge, quarter-inch edge. I mean your quarter-inch edge that's raised, and then on this side is the beveled edge. And I'll show you what we do with that in a minute, but that is so helpful. All right, then you'll also need a pressing surface and your iron, and of course your fabric. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to concentrate on this A1 block. It is a very easy one because you can see it only uses one color family in it. So cut out your block. Do not cut on the dashed line yet. Cut in between the dashed lines. All right, so we've got that cut out. So let's take a look at this real quick before we get started. You'll notice on here, here's your block. This outside line is the edge of the block. The dashed line is the seam allowance. And in it, you will see it's cut up into segments. These solid lines are going to be your sew lines. Each segment has a number. That's your sewing order. And then, of course, it'll tell you what color fabric that you're going to put in that area. You'll also notice over here, there is, this one is A1. That is the block placement. And I will show you in the pattern. All our patterns have this guide, this roadmap over here. And it shows you where all the blocks go on the quilt. And so this is A1, so it's right at the top. This quilt is built in columns. So when you're done sewing, you'll just pin it on your design wall right up there. And as you make more blocks, you'll just pin them up and fill in the quilt as you go. Okay, so first things first, this is where the beveled edge comes into play. We're going to start by sewing start sewing 1 to 2. Pretty obvious. Lay your ruler with the beveled edge on that line between 1 and 2 and fold it over on that line. If you don't have one of these, just use your regular acrylic ruler. Same thing, line it up on the line, fold it. So you don't have to have it, it's just a nice thing to have. All right, so we're doing light background and light background. So I'm doing mine in pinks. So I've got these fun little light pinks over here to choose from. All right, so I lay my number 2 fabric down first, face up. Then I put my number 1 fabric face down on top of that. And so it's right sides together, just like regular piecing. So you line those up with the cut edge together. All right, so now since we have our fabric 1 on top, you want your fabric, your section 1 to touch that. And that way, if these were different colors, you would know you always have the right fabric in the right section. Okay, now one of the biggest stressors of paper piecing is when you sew your pieces together and you open it up to press and one of the areas is not filled completely with fabric. Very frustrating, but we have a great way to avoid that, and it does really cut down on the stress load. All right, what you're going to do is for this first seam, this is the hardest, just because there can be so much shifting involved. You're going to fold over on the line where we already folded, align that along your cut edge of your fabric, and eyeball 1/4 of an inch. It doesn't have to be exact for this first one, but just get it close. Okay, so now how to find out if we've covered our area, you just peek under there. So this is my light 1. This is my light number 1, and I know it's this piece, and I know it has to go clear out to here, and oh boy, it does not. So I know that won't work. So there's no way I can shift that around. So I need to get a different piece. But you know what I think I will do, since these are both lights, let's just swap them. I'll make this my number 2 and put that on the bottom. And now this becomes my 1. Again, I line it up. Okay, let's look. Lay it down there. Eyeball 1/4 of an inch. And yes, I can see that this number 1 fabric now covers that entire area, including the seam allowance. All right, so now about this number 2, we know it has to go clear out to there. So I'll fold that over, and I know it has to go clear out to there. See, it's shifting a little bit. Just keep zhuzhing it. So I look under there, and no, it is not big enough. Okay, so this piece is just not going to work. So let's try to find in my pile. You can see I save all my little scraps because you never know when they'll come in handy. Okay, look, this one's bigger. All right, so number 2, lay down, face up. Number 1 on top of it, face down, so it's right sides together. Eyeball that 1/4 of an inch on that cut line. Look under there. Okay, I know this piece is big enough, and I know for my bottom piece it has to go clear out to there. So I look under there. Oh yeah, that one is much better. Okay, so now I can safely take this to my machine and sew. All right, just a quick note about your sewing machine setup. Make sure you reduce your stitch length. I can't tell you what to reduce it to, just it has to be small enough, short enough to hold together when you tear out the paper, but yet not so small that if you have to rip, you can't rip it out. So you'll just have to play with that. On my Bernina, my regular stitch length is 2.5, so I reduce it to 2. So you'll just have to play with it on your machine. Okay, so now I'm going to take this over to my machine. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to sew. So I'm going to start sewing. We sew on the line, but I start sewing a little bit out here, and then I sew off the edge of the seam allowance over there. All right, so I'm going to sew that. I realize you can't see this. Okay, so I sewed on the line, and I've done this in red threads so you can see what I was talking about. See, I started sewing right there and I ended off there. Okay, so now we are going to press this open. So open up your paper and open up your fabric and press. Okay, there we go. So that's your first 2 seams done. So now it's just rinse and repeat from here on out. Okay, so now we go to number 3, and we're going to sew on this line in between 1 and 3. And so we do this again. We fold on the line using that beveled edge of the ruler or your acrylic ruler, whatever you have. And this time we're going to use the 1/4 inch lip, and we're going to lay that along the edge of that paper, and you can feel it, it just locks in. And we're going to trim our 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now when we add our number 3 piece on, we have that exact 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're ready to go. All right, so for this one, I need, let's see, oh, I bet I can use this one that didn't work before. So lay that down on your table, facing up, and lay this on there, matching up those cut edges. Okay, so again, I know it has to go clear out to there, and it has to go to there. So I look under there. Oh yeah, that bottom piece is well outside those parameters. Okay, so I take it back to my machine, open up, and sew on the line. And I started outside that, and I ended outside there. And the reason you do that is you can see right here when we go to sew this last seam line, it will lock those stitches in place. Okay, so we open it up and press. Okay, so now we're ready to do our last one. So we fold on the line. Now this time, you don't want to take out those stitches. You want to tear it from the paper, because if you take out those stitches, then it won't lock in and it will defeat the purpose of sewing off. So you tear the paper part, not that part. Okay, so you fold that back on the line, and don't forget to trim your seam allowance. Trimming can be intimidating sometimes. I hear people saying they get nervous with trimming, but don't be. You need to trim because it gets rid of all the bulk. If you don't trim, it'll be so thick, it would be very hard to quilt in the end. Okay, so now we have one last light background we need to sew on there, and just kind of auditioning, oh, that might work, but boy, that's so tight. I don't want to live with that stress. Let's see this one. Nope, that's way too small. Okay, I'm going to have to go to a larger piece and cut some out. So you can see paper piecing is messy, and I just kind of, you know, it's just kind of serendipity. You just grab a fabric and cut it out and see if it works. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, like if you're working with grass or sky, you might want to find some fabric that has little bugs in it, or a bird or a rainbow or something. Those little Easter eggs are always fun to put in if you can find them. Okay, so I have my last piece. I've cut it. It's fairly straight on that one edge. I've laid it down right side up, and I've folded and I've cut my seam allowance. So I'm laying that on there, and I can see that it goes outside both those sides, and it has to go clear out to there. And I can tell that it's plenty big. Okay, so I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and sew outside the line, then on the line. Okay. All right, there I've sewn it on. Now I open it up and press. Okay, so for trimming this block, I like to trim from the solid line, 1/4 inch. So I line up my ruler on the solid line at the 1/4 inch and then trim. You can also just trim from the dashed line, but sometimes, depending on your foundation paper, I know newsprint can shrink a little when the heat hits it, when your iron hits it. So I just think, for me, it just seems like it's a little more accurate to just trim from the solid line. But at the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter. Another thing to note, these blocks are all different sizes. They're not uniform. So just trim them as they are. Don't worry about measurements on them because they will all be different. So that is how to do block 1. Look for other videos in this series on how to do more complex blocks.